Great to be here, and I'm going to talk not so much about nuclear war, although I'll mention that, and pick up on some of the issues we've been raising already. Is the connection between war and energy in particular, with some reference to what's happening in the Ukraine, and then against the backdrop of climate breakdown. I don't think we should call it climate change, because it's like calling an invading army unwelcome guests. You know, it just is singularly inappropriate. It doesn't capture what it is that we're facing. And in reference to what Christian was talking about earlier on, just to give a few shout out for some great podcasts from a working class socialist Marxist background, check out The Week at Work, which is a weekly left-wing review of papers north and south in Ireland. A worker's guide to everything that is run out of trademark Belfast here, and also Rupture Radio are three that I think, again, you could disagree with the politics, the analysis, but it is one of the advantages, if you like, of social media in terms of being able to at least have access to alternative voices. And it goes without saying, most of you would be aware of the connection between energy and war. The war in Iraq was a war for oil. Said very eloquently, to go back, interesting enough, to what we were discussing earlier on, Alan Greenspan, absolute neocon, Reaganite, former head of the Federal Reserve in America, at a congressional hearing, admitted it's an inconvenient truth to admit, but the war in Iraq was a war for oil. So we already have one example of the issue of energy and conflict. Of course, the war in Ukraine is no different, although it slightly has a particular angle to it, is that literally the fueling of the Russian war machine is in part because of an oil dependence in terms of Russian exporting coal oil and gas. And of course, this was even received within the liberal media in Europe, and quickly then in a country like Germany, which is very heavily dependent on imports of Russian gas. You also had that gobshite Boris Johnson, who went cap in hand to the Saudis. So we don't want the horrible Russian fossil fuels, but we get our fix of fossil fuels from somewhere else. From a scientific point of view, it doesn't matter a damn where you get your fossil fuels from, is that it's going to cook the planet. So there's an issue in terms of connecting all of these things together. It then gets more complicated in that if you look at energy, energy is the hidden, I wouldn't say factor of human evolution, but it's an incredibly important part of understanding human history and understanding events that are happening in our societies, because it hides in plain sight. The electricity we're now enjoying today comes from Kilroot Power Station across Belfast Lough, dependent upon imported natural gas. Our food system is absolutely dripping in oil. It takes an awful lot of carbon energy. So carbon energy is basically a catch-all term for coal, oil, and gas. If we couldn't engage in what's called the Haber-Bosch process to fix nitrogen, which takes an awful lot of energy, we wouldn't be able to feed millions of people. A lot of people would die if we couldn't produce nitrogen. And that's also part of the Ukraine story, because it was a major producer of nitrogen and other fertilizers. Name me one thing in this room that isn't transported here in whole or part, or made in whole or part, without the use of fossil fuel. And that, in a way, is what I mean by energy hiding in plain sight, in terms of going unremarked because it's so ubiquitous. So our societies are energy stories. I mean, you can actually look at the evolution of human society as us capturing more and more forms of energy, a complex social division of labor, never mind globalization and so on, and requires an awful lot of energy. Societies in the past were simpler, yes, because of the low levels of social organization, low levels of technological development, but also crucially that low levels of use of energy. The one thing, particularly about oil, what makes oil such a wonderful resource in some respects, is that it's incredibly energy dense. For the same, energy output of a gallon of oil, you'll need multiple more forms of renewable energy, for example. So I actually think my own view is that in terms of looking at the future, in terms of green energy, and it's often called a low carbon future for climate reasons, I think we also need to consider a low energy society, because we waste so much energy. And the cheapest and most climate friendly form of energy is the energy you don't use. So if you don't like what's happening, if you buy into that narrative, if you like, of buying Russian oil or Saudi oil and so on, retrofit your house or demand the state retrofit your house. And this for me, brings, like I started there, the war in Ukraine. You can mention the fact that I think it's over 50% of Ukrainian electricity comes from I think it's 15 nuclear power stations that they had. Zabornitsa is the one that's in the news all the time because it's under Russian control. I think electricity production in France is probably 80% is the highest, and so on. But the reality is that we need energy, but we waste so much energy. And I think in terms of developing a working class, ordinary citizen understanding of these issues, because for many people, the whole climate issue is seen as middle class, it's seen as elitist, it's seen as woke, it's seen as the guilty middle classes, talking about the issues of something that's happening far away. The reality is it's hard to think about the end of the world, like climate crisis, when you can't think about the end of the week. But I do think, for me, that most unsexy, perhaps, of policy responses to the climate crisis and the energy crisis is simply insulating people's houses. Insulate people's houses. And I speak because I also co-chair the Belfast Climate Commission, which looks at the city and its energy needs and so on. And we did a piece of analysis about 2 years ago. And we're unique in Belfast and in the north of Ireland in the sense that we are so dependent upon oil for space heating. That is unique in Europe. Most other places, it's either gas, solid fuel, maybe electricity, heat pumps, and so on. And it explains in a way why we have the highest levels of energy poverty, perhaps, in Europe. If you go onto the Department for the Economy's website, and energy poverty, by the way, is when you're spending 10% of your income or more just to keep warm. Now, the official government figures we have is 22%. The reality is about 70% as a result of the spike in the price of oil and gas because of the war in Ukraine. But it's not all to do with the war in Ukraine. It's got to do with price gouging by BP, Exxon, Mobil. That's why I call it a cost of profiteering crisis, not a cost of living crisis. So we have astronomically high levels of energy poverty in our city. It gets even worse in rural parts of the north because they are absolutely dependent upon oil for space heating. And to me, this is a very simple job creating, because we're going to need to pay people, employ people to retrofit these houses. It would reduce energy poverty. It would give people more money in their pockets, improve their health, because we have the evidence. We have colleagues here at Queen's University that do research on this, as in Ulster, where, epidemiologically or medically, and some of you perhaps have lived in houses like this, you only have to go a couple of 100 yards in the Holy Land, see the shit conditions students are living in, damp, energy leaky houses, people getting sick. We know that this has a major impact on the ability of children to learn. But there's also an economic benefit of all of this, is that we know that particularly those on low income, on welfare in particular, they almost spend all of their income. So the more you give them in terms of disposable, discretionary income, they spend in the local economy. Unlike those on higher income who tend to save and don't spend in the local economy. So we have multiple benefits in that one simple policy. It's very unsexy. What do we want? Housing insulation. When do we want it? No, overthrow capitalism doesn't have the same cachet. But this would be an immediate benefit to working class communities. More importantly, though, it would demonstrate to working class people that action on climate change does not have to be punitive, sacrificial, or that it's somehow only for the middle classes. And that to me is the one way you can start, as I did with the Ukraine, and end up in Belfast in terms of how energy and the energy transition it can be important in that. I am somebody who believes in nuclear power. Pause for effect, the nuclear power of the sun. We can get into this debate maybe later. Some of my reasons why I don't agree with nuclear power is historically, I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, because I'm not an expert on this area, is that there's no example of a civilian nuclear energy system that wasn't connected to nuclear weapons. The whole basis of the nuclear energy industry was to produce weapons-grade plutonium and so on. Ridiculously, both the British government and the European Commission, backed down by the European Parliament, have classified nuclear energy as green. It's seen now as a form of green energy, in part to raise finance and investment and so on. Actually, the European Commission has also labeled gas as green. You're through the looking glass here in terms of you're describing these forms of energy as green. Green energy is solar energy. It can be seen as geothermal from the heat beneath our feet, of which Northern Ireland is actually quite well placed geologically. There's quite a lot of geothermal energy that we could be exploiting. Wind, solar, biomass, that's renewable energy. I have a principled reason why I think nuclear power is not a viable solution to particularly the climate crisis. One is that it's not low carbon. If you were to calculate the full life cycle of a nuclear power station, the embedded carbon energy in the concrete, so it's not just about the production of the electricity once the system is up, you're going to look at the whole life cycle, it doesn't add up to be a low carbon energy source. They're incredibly expensive and they take decades to build. Hinkley Power Point was once described quite rightly as the most expensive thing on the planet. 10 years delayed at the cost of billions, we could quickly build renewable energy systems quicker. But as I say, focus on energy reduction through things like housing insulation. So that's the first reason why I'm principally against nuclear power as a solution. The second one is a technical issue that when we produce electricity from nuclear power, it produces waste, which can have a half-life of thousands of years. And we have no solution to this waste. The best we've done is we encase it in glass and then we bury it in the ground to let future generations deal with it. So there's no solution to the issue of nuclear waste beyond what that fucking Egypt Sammy Wilson wanted to do. He wanted to open up the gas cavern or the caverns in Island McGee as a way, as a place that could be used for nuclear storage. So there's no solution, or at least no viable at cost solution to the issue of the waste. That's a toxic legacy we leave for those who come after us. It's also then the danger of nuclear breakdown. We have Fukushima, we had Chernobyl, and so on. So there's another danger there. And also then the last issue is from a Marxist or a democratic socialist point of view, it's much easier to democratize the energy means of production if they are renewable than if they are necessarily nuclear. It's just technically easier. We have a distributed energy system where communities and people can own and control their own means of production. It's just technically much more simple. But as I say, the most important thing for me in all this discussion of particularly climate and the energy transition, and it's the bit that doesn't really get the attention it deserves, is energy conservation, energy efficiency, energy reduction. We waste so much energy. So for me, I cannot see any viable, compelling argument in favor of nuclear power as a solution to the climate crisis. But as I say, more importantly, I can't imagine, although I'm happy to be persuaded otherwise, can we imagine a war that's a renewable energy-based war, in the same way you get a war for oil? And uranium, which we need to create nuclear power itself, is not renewable either. So for me, a safer world is a world of renewable energy, ideally owned and controlled by workers and communities. Particularly, as I say, as part of this transition is about reducing our energy, making sure that all our buildings are energy efficient, energy tight, and so on. Passive house standard is the housing standard we should be going for. So for me, I'll just finish on this. I'm happy then we can have an open discussion. We are facing an existential crisis on this planet at the minute. You know, you can read reports, as I do as an academic, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they've been producing ever more detailed and worsening reports. They're not telling the whole truth because there's a political process involved. They are scientists, but the reports they produce have to be gone through and agreed by governments almost line by line. So you get very powerful oil states like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UEA, and so on, or even China and India, watering down what it is that these scientists are telling us. We've already experienced, even here in the north, the impacts of climate breakdown. In Derry and Strabane, we had some devastating floods, and we will experience climate breakdown in the form of floods and increased heat waves. And it's really Christianism here because it's a real bugbear of mine, the way in which the media portray the climate crisis in summer. So we had a heat wave in London where we reached 40 degrees, unprecedented. At the same time, of course, there was less attention given what was happening in Pakistan and India, where they had a heat dome that was so severe that the birds were falling out of the sky, people dying of heat stroke and so on. What did the media report here in the north? Do you remember Ballywattacock? Because it had reached 38 degrees or something higher. And suddenly and they were presenting the breakdown of our climate as a fucking nice day to go to the beach and have ice cream. That were the images that were being used. So we have a serious problem with the way in which the media is portraying us, covering and understanding the breakdown of the living systems of the planet. And all of this, we see these devastating wildfires in Australia. We also had flooding, heat waves, tornadoes, exacerbated hurricanes. These extreme weather events are getting more and more frequent around the world. And that's only at this stage of global heating. We are at 1.1 degree global average increase in temperature against pre-industrial levels. Myself and my colleagues who look at this, and also, some of those involved in the IPCC, we are probably on track for a 2.5 degree warmer world by the mid-century. That is a trip through the apocalypse. A trip through the apocalypse. If you look at the science and you're not shit scared, you're not reading it. So for me, we've been going in the wrong direction for at least 30 years. We've known, the science has been pretty clear. When you burn carbon dioxide because of your use of fossil fuels, it's also a particular challenge here on the island of Ireland around cows and dairy and meat industry. Cows farting and belching produces a gas called methane. And methane is over 20 times more powerful as a climate-changing gas than carbon. We are unique on the island of Ireland, and that our challenge as we move into this low carbon, green energy future, or climate resilient, if we do, is that our biggest impact is not in energy production, it's not in transportation, although they are high, it's in our agri-food sector. Almost 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions that's causing climate change in the north here come from agriculture. It's 42% down south. So there's a political issue here in terms of how do we reassure farmers, because they've done nothing wrong. They were responding to incentives that were put in place by government, particularly after the Second World War, of making sure that there was always food security. So there is a political challenge in terms of reaching out to farmers to get them to move away from this heavy reliance on dairy and beef, most of which, of course, is multinationalized, Brazilian-owned farms, conglomerates, Moy Park and so on. Remember them from RHI? So it's not as if it's farmers that are benefiting. The multinationals see Ireland as an exploitable place. in which to be able to produce, particularly quantities of meat and dairy. So I'll end it there. There's lots more I can say, particularly because energy is a fascinating area to look at, just in terms of how it's every part of our lives. I've talked about fertilizer, I've talked about the war in Ukraine, talked about housing insulation, food. And I do think maybe this is something that, you know, we should have further meetings on, particularly in how do we make this land with people. I'm conscious as an academic, the language we use is shite at getting to people to understand it. I think things like housing retrofit, price gouging by these multinational fossil fuel companies, people get that. Tons of carbon, give me a break. It's not, that's for policy wonks and so on. When you have to deal with this issue, don't get me wrong, but I do think that it's the language and the narrative that we need to change. And particularly, as the great Chico Mendes said, who was a Brazilian trade unionist and murdered trade unionist at that, he said, ecology without class politics is gardening. Ecology without class politics is gardening. And we need to move beyond this and see this is a central issue for the working classes, because they are the ones who are going to suffer the most. They're already suffering the worst globally around the world. It's the poor, and particularly women in other countries of the world are suffering this the most. And the other element where this is a class issue for me is, and we have the evidence, and this is where I do think we need to be much more critical of people in my profession in the academy, where we have this knowledge and we're not making it clearer. We know the top 1% richest people on the planet produce as much greenhouse gases as the bottom 50% of humanity. What the fuck? So the way to tackle this then is in terms of, yeah, let's have a carbon tax on private jets, on having 6 or 7 large homes, and not do what Macron did in France. Remember the Gilets Jaunes movement, the yellow vest movement? Now, it was very complex. It wasn't all left-wing in orientation, but a lot of that was motivated by the fact that Macron put on a flat carbon tax, which of course impacted mostly on working class people. So I do think we can turn this into a class issue by identifying we literally cannot afford the rich. And in the same way, I was suggesting to change the narrative, there's not a cost of living, it's a cost of profiteering crisis. We should say we don't have a poverty problem, we have a fucking wealth problem. And these are the impacts of it, never mind in terms of increasing inequality. So I think there is great opportunities in terms of developing, if you like, a working class or an eco-socialist understanding of the climate crisis connected with energy, link it to ultimately, it's about, in my mind, democratically owning and controlling the means of production and the energy means of production at that. And that should now be included as part of the other, kind of Marxist, inherited or ideas we have around the means of production. So with energy, for me, is a really important issue. It reveals class politics, it reveals what's happening in the climate. It connects us to this global story. You can bring in food and so on. So I'll end it there, and then we can have an open discussion.